Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I guess there's only one track, so you don't have a choice. But yeah, my name is James Dooley, and if you can tell from my voice, yeah, I've come here from London. My first time, and yeah, really enjoying Australia so far. I didn't know this, but it turns out that my name, Dooley, is kind of like an Australian phrase that some people use for incredulous surprise. Who knows? Yeah, like, holy dooly. So I was super stoked to find that out, and I'm really going to try and make that a thing back home. Yeah, I'm going to bring that back, so thanks, guys. And I also found out that Sydney is home to a pretty rockin' band called the Hooly Dooly. Do we recognize this? Yeah, okay. If you don't, check them out. I did. Some absolute bangers, so, you know. But actually, I'm not here to plug the Hooly Doolies. Back in London, I work for the BBC, and I work for a team called News Labs. And so we have an interesting challenge in our team. And Labs is about trying to future-proof news so that it stays relevant and sustainable as media needs evolve and change. And we're seeing that happen over time right now. And we drive innovation in the newsroom by experimenting with new tools and ideas and that fuel cutting-edge journalism. We do this with a small team of engineers, designers, and journalists, and we try to research, ideate, and cook up prototypes in about 6 weeks. We have two main strands of what we do. So the first is improving production workflows. We build a lot of internal-facing tools for our journalists, and we often use React. And we try to do the heavy lifting for them to try and empower them to be more productive. So things like translation for our world service teams. The BBC outputs in, I think, 42 different languages around the world, and there's a lot we can do around reuse and reversioning content for different audiences. We also do a lot with creating faster workflows for our video producers. And then on the other side of that is the audience. So we experiment with new formats and new ways to tell stories to them. Things like conversational chatbots on Messenger, WhatsApp, and also inside of our articles as well. And we've done some really big stuff in the past with Amazon Alexa and delivering interactive news via voice. And I just wanted to explore that one really quickly, because for Alexa, we built a prototype called Skippy. And I thought this was an oddly appropriate anecdote, being here in Australia. But also, it was our first ever time using React. And it's a good example of how we use it to glue things together and why we love it. So Skippy was about creating a skippable news experience on Alexa. And it started in a hack day. One of our awesome teammates, Lay, basically got Alexa to give us the top BBC articles and allow you to skip through them. It was pretty basic, but people liked it. And so we wanted to take it further, because it's all well and good having a synthetic voice reading you the news, but people want to hear real voices. And who knew? The BBC has heaps of that, right? So I'm not kidding. For every hour of the day, we're producing about 57 hours of content, which is huge. And for Skippy, it seemed like a waste to not use that, right? But when these voice platforms were first launching, there wasn't a clear way for journalists to get content out on Alexa. So we said, can we make a tool to help create compelling and interactive programs for voice? I don't know, sure. And we kind of just kicked off with a little Create React app. And I said, what is React? I had no idea. And we've all had this feeling now as part of the JavaScript community where you find that someone has made exactly what you need. And this is happening time and time again. And it's amazing, right? So we needed a way to chop up our radio broadcast content. And with the library of BBC UI components and a tool for waveforms, we could start cooking something up. And all right, I was starting to understand why people like React. I was not a UI developer. I wasn't even a front-end developer. And maybe you can tell, but it made sense. And pretty quickly, we could get something up on the front end. And we were ingesting radio content and letting producers carve out highlights. But we ran into a problem, because Skippy was about more than just skipping through programs. It was about creating interactive journeys and stories for users, pieced together with different bits of content. And speaking to audio producers, we found they were really used to that workflow, of having assets and dragging them onto that timeline. this was really important for them. As a prototyping team, our first instinct was to say, no way, not for an MVP. We don't have time. But we actually found it was pretty simple. So we turned to React drag and drop, and I'm sure a lot of you have used it. It's a super intuitive plug-and-play tool, and I'm really excited for the beautiful D&D talk later as well. And yeah, and in order to order our assets, we used React sortable tree. And shout out to both of these, because with them we were able to do some pretty fun and functional things. So we can drag in our audio clips and design how an interactive program would flow exactly on Alexa. And we can create nested journeys. So you can ask Alexa to skip, say, the whole section of business news or the sport if you're not interested, or you can get a personal deep dive. Ask Alexa, tell me more, and then get a human deep dive on Brexit or whatever it is that you want to hear. And this was big. So, looking back, yeah, it looked a little wild for sure, yeah, but we were able to make a novel interface really quickly that worked for content producers. And we were delivering programs in a brand new interactive medium. There's a lot more to this, but to skip to the end, we were able to go from a hack day idea to a prototype to getting it productionized. And Skippy actually gave birth to a whole new department in the BBC, with now hundreds of people creating content every day for voice. So we're able to kickstart some beautiful things in labs. And we love React because reusable components help us move quickly and not reinvent the wheel. So we wanted to make more of what we do reusable and help others. And we thought we could do this in an area that we have a lot of trouble with: transcription. So taking your audio or video and turning it into text, right? This step is kind of at the heart of content production for a lot of places at the BBC. And if you're wondering, why transcripts useful, just very quickly, journalists have to pull out key quotes and bits of information really quickly. On a larger scale, researchers have to collate hours and hours of interviews, and then they analyze these in depth to create stories and documentaries. And then down the line from that, video producers use transcripts to navigate footage, and they start building up a catalog of shots. And then they use these to edit footage. They start building out programs. Afterwards, in post-production, they use transcripts to create captions for our videos and make them more accessible. And also, transcripts are just data-rich, so you could perform entity extraction on them, pull out topics and tags, and then use these and add them to your pages and make them more searchable. But the kicker is this. Just 1 hour of media takes 3 to 4 hours to transcribe manually. And if you're a journalist, this could be half of your working day spent doing something laborious and non-creative. But as engineers in the room, you're probably thinking, there's no way people do this themselves in 2020. But shockingly, they do. And they have done for years, which is nuts. So there are alternatives. There are basically agencies where you can outsource it to another human. These cost you at least $1 a minute, or $60 an hour, if not actually a lot more. And you're waiting for someone to do it on the other end, usually over a few days. But then there are some pretty sweet automated transcription apps, basically using speech to text. These are obviously a lot cheaper. But we start entering that world of voice recognition mishaps. We've all seen the Siri and Alexa errors, right? And regardless of either one, we have investigative journalists at the BBC who deal with very sensitive content, and they can't send it out to random people or random servers. And so with time, cost, and security in mind, News Labs a couple of years ago made a tool called Octo, and it generates transcripts for our journalists. It used an open source speech-to-text engine, and we trained it with thousands of hours of content from the BBC archives. And we were able to bring the cost down pretty dramatically. So, if you're in one of our bureaus in Delhi or Jakarta and you're dealing with 30 hours of, interview footage, or if you're one of the archive teams and you're dealing with 30 years of TV output, this is huge, right? So Octo was pretty simple. You select your media, and then it gives you back a transcript. But naturally, it wasn't perfect. There would be, spelling or formatting errors you need to deal with. Sometimes maybe it would deal with, struggle with background noise. And what users would typically do is, copy that email, stick it into Microsoft Word, and carry on. But we were losing so much data at the editing step, and it seemed like a shame. So what we wanted to do was make a plug-and-play editor to navigate and correct these transcripts and keep all of this timing information that we have. We called it React Transcript Editor, which is, yeah, very creative. But we were able to go from an email to something like this. This is what our editor looks like. Oh. This is what our editor looks like. Videos, eh? It's all power. This is what our editor looks like. And it's all powered by word-level timings that we get from our transcript. And it lets us do so much. You can seek around the video using the text. You can click on any word to jump to that point. And it makes navigating and analyzing your own content so much easier. So we spoke to lots of journalists. And we found out how they work and what they would really want in a text editor that would allow you to navigate transcripts. So we've added in some really simple but really effective features. Some really simple things that made it so much better. So easy keyboard shortcuts to navigate around. Changing the playback speed so you can drop it down. Sometimes it's too hard to keep up. Is this speed better? Well, how about this? And by adding this, I'm just going to say a bunch of words now because I can't think of it, but it's going to be really, 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 really fast. And also features like pausing while you're typing. So the playhead doesn't run away from you. Making the whole experience of editing much easier, more effective, and more ergonomic. Then our battery died, which is classic. But I know what some of you are thinking, and the answer is yes. We can use this for karaoke as well. So I muted this for everyone's sake, but as we follow along to Smash Mouth and we start adding new words and deleting mistakes, our timecode data is going to start to degrade, right? It gets patchy. And so an important thing that we do is fill in these gaps. And we estimate based on the surrounding words that don't have times, and we interpolate between them. So we can keep this data in sync and preserve valuable timing information, right? Because ultimately, journalists can still just copy this into Microsoft Word if they want. I don't know what they would be doing with the Shrek soundtrack, but ultimately, we can now do so much more. We can create subtitle files, we can export it into Premiere Pro, or even take the corrected JSON and build upon it in other apps. And this data was all powered by Draft.js. So who's developed with Draft before? Anyone? Well, that's quite a lot of you. Has anyone used like a different editor, maybe like Quill or Slate? Okay, you probably know more than me. But actually, I'll correct myself. Draft isn't an editor. It defines itself as a framework to build editors, right? And yeah, for the people who put their hands up, they'll know the learning curve is pretty steep. And it seemed like a really powerful tool with a really solid community behind it. So we dove in. And inside of a Draft-powered editor is a solid data representation. So it's a single source of truth. And if you change that data, Draft handles all the DOM manipulation for you. It abstracts away from content editable, which is really finicky, fiddly, and just inconsistent across browsers. And that's powered by immutable.js. Does everyone know immutable.js? So, yeah, OK. a couple of heads nodding. What this basically means is when we change our draft data, we just get back a whole new copy. And that sounds a bit intense, but actually the new copy is just a reference to the old data, and only the reference and the change occupy new memory. So the overhead is less than you'd actually think. And this gives us some things for free. So the undo and redo stacks are just copies that we can keep track of, which are pretty useful in a text editor. And there's also a great talk by Nick Graff that goes into it more. But we can just dive in. So we can get a text editor in 10 lines, right? Except I'm totally lying. This is really more of like a controlled input. And to do anything complicated in Draft, it takes a lot of work. And we need to dig into editor state. We have to manage our own focus and the paragraph splitting and how we deal with that time data. So editor state is like our engine for Draft.js. And it exposes different APIs, which are the building blocks of how we build something like this. So there's content state, which deals with everything in your editor. Selection state handles and exposes your focus, selection, cursor, all of that. There's a cool thing called decorators, where you can substitute in custom components in certain situations. For example, if you wanted to do hashtags or autocomplete them or at mentions. And normally with decorators, there's some metadata behind it. So entities allow you to annotate ranges of text with the metadata. If we jump into content state, though, content state is a series of blocks. And our blocks are our power graphs. There's a data model, and we're looking at it in the right-hand side. That's just our React Dev Tools. It's immutable, but we've serialized it to JSON. So when we start typing, is it move? Oh, OK, cool. Yeah, it actually took me like 10 goes to write this without any mistakes, but there we go. And our state's changing. But we want rich text, right? So we can use a rich utils function. We can make that bold. Yep, and make that italic. Cool. Now, this is nice. Draft lets us use ranges to hold metadata. So if we look on the right-hand side, we've got inline style ranges. And if we take the first, it's actually pretty descriptive, and it makes sense. So it just says that 8 characters in for the next 11 characters, make it bold. And that makes sense. So when we start typing and making corrections to our transcript, the offsets are going to keep this data in sync, right? But we don't care about styling. Well, not at this conference, but we want timing information, right? We all want time. So if you remember Octo, before the email, we actually had all of that transcript data. And it looked like this underneath. It's a giant JSON file with data on each word that speech to text picked up. And it goes on forever. So like a 30-minute transcript is tens of thousands of lines. All we were using were the display strings. But now we have, a framework to use the extra metadata, this really powerful timing information that we have. So we've got our transcripts, and we want to get it into Draft. So Draft exposes an entity map, which is basically like a data store. And we can stick all of our metadata in, all of our fragments, and all of our timing information, and we get back a key. So if we remember back to our block level paragraph data, it might look something like this. And then in order to associate the timing information underneath, we need to add some entity ranges. And so give it a key, which associates to the one that we stuck in the data store. And then we do this when we first serialize and import the transcript data. And it's a bit finicky, it's a bit fiddly, but afterwards, the offsets and the lengths can basically adjust when we start adding our timings, our adjustments to our transcript, sorry. But but when we start adding new words or words deleting words, it gets patchy, right? So if we add in things in between, we won't have time information for that. And what we do is we also take a diff, using the difflib, which is like a Python library we wrap around, and then we do some linear interpolation, and we start to calculate timings for all of these. And so that's how we keep track of time data in Draft.js and power something like a transcript editor. Excuse me. So we made it for journalists, but we packaged it for developers, because if you're using BBC Octo or something off the shelf, like Amazon Transcribe or IBM Watson, you can do that, right? And so no matter what incoming transcript data you have, we can serialize it to a draft format. And we have a bunch of adapters for that, which is really nice. So we also made it an open source component library. So you can get the whole app in like just a couple of props. Or if you just want the timed text editor and you want to hook it up to your own video player, for example, you can do that too. And so that's how you use it. And we use it as well. We've used it in a bunch of different apps and prototypes down the line. One recently is digital paper edit. So the process I described before of recording, transcribing, analyzing, and then piecing everything together. This is called paper editing. And it's a really common workflow in program making, but it's really painful. It takes a long, long time. So we automated this process. So we use the editor, and we get correct and accurate transcripts with spot-on timings. And then afterwards, we build another layer on top. So we've taken the paper edit, and we've built it in React. So we can start to highlight and analyze our transcripts, build up a corpus of good bits of information, good clips to use in a program, and then we can start to assemble a program script of our highlights on the right-hand side, which is a little bit like Skippy, right? And because of the transcript, and we have the timing information on every word, we can then just assemble a video edit just like that. So we click preview, and everything is cut together automatically, which is super handy. Obviously, you're not going to do all of your editing in a React app for a program, so afterwards, we can export an edit decision list and then pass it on to whatever program for your final touches. So we're really scrappy in labs, and just like Skippy, components are helping us build new systems quickly. We've also seen this editor that we've made adapted and adopted in other newsrooms, like The Guardian and Times, and a bunch of others in Europe and South America. So it's really nice to see them use it, feedback and contribute, and then innovate in their own spaces as well. So just a couple things. Yeah, I've said it a few times, we're a prototyping team, and making something reusable is hard. And if anyone is a newsroom developer here, you'll know that journalists are very challenging to design for. We sat and we talked to a lot of them and found out how they work, but it's an old school industry, and everyone does things differently. Importantly, to get adoption for your tools in a big organization, you have to solve a lot of problems and solve them really well before people are going to change how they work. We targeted, tech-savvy journos as our early adopters, but this still ended up with us piling in features and toggles, settings, all these different use cases, which ended up seeing our props spiral out of control, which brings me to the pains of scaling a prototype in an innovation team. We started off just seeing if this was possible in Draft.js. And so instead of getting everything perfect, we just went deeper and deeper. We wrote this a good while ago before we were using hooks and context. And while we see limitations of some parts of our prototypey code that we can address, there are also limitations of Draft and handling data this way in large quantities. And it seems like active development on Draft has stopped, which is a bit worrying. So we would love to explore different approaches with some alternative frameworks, like Quill or Slate. And one thing I'd say is, if you're doing anything complex, build an abstraction layer for it, because you never know when you're going to have to change it out for a different engine, and there's going to be a lot of work. And that's currently where we are, so don't do what we did. And if what you're doing isn't too complex, then get what you can for free. Because, like I said, Draft provides you the building blocks, but you still have to piece together everything yourself. Other frameworks might be more complete out of the box, or you can use some plugin frameworks. But for us, under the hood, having to deal with styling, changing entities, and shifting all this styling and data, it was needlessly complex in Draft. And I didn't even get onto the headaches of splitting paragraphs and controlling focus. It wasn't particularly interesting, but it was just a lot of code and a lot of head scratching. But if you've worked on text editors, please come chat to us, because we'd love to learn from you. And so, the last thing is the community is here to help. The cross-section of transcription heads and text editor framework in React heads is, it's pretty small. And it's a niche area, and most things in the space are commercial. So being in such a specific domain has meant that our contributors in all these different newsrooms around the world are super enthusiastic. And that's really helped keep things moving, because, again, we work on different projects every 6 weeks, and it's really hard. Jed's actually talked about the first sort of phases of open source, and it's super exciting. People are contributing, you're learning lots. But it's starting to get into that next phase where it's a bit overwhelming, and every new feature adds more core complexity. So we're trying to find out how to deal with that. But ultimately, helping other newsrooms was what we wanted to do, and so we're really happy with that. So yeah, just finally, we're here to keep BBC News and all public service journalism relevant. And we need to find ways to reinvent news so that it can be sustainable in this new era, as audience behaviors and needs change and evolve with technology. One way we can do this is by reevaluating how we create content, and by doing more with the data that we have, making it more reusable, preserving it, and making it more discoverable for content creators. This way, we can equip journalists with tools to easily construct new stories and experiences which are scalable and adaptable to our audience needs. And React is helping us on this journey. So, thank you.